heart, your spirit. Are you weary? If you are carrying a heavy load, listen to this invitation. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. And you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus' invitation in Matthew chapter 11, come to me, all who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest, may be one of the most comforting passages in Scripture. And it was and continues to be an open invitation. This open access to knowing God was markedly different from what the political and religious leaders of the time practiced. Their invitations were reserved only for those who had power and privilege and were considered learned. Chad Martin, in his commentary from the Christian Century, writes, and I quote, "Much of the chapter leading up to this invitation consists of Jesus' teaching about the ways of knowing God outside of theological training and strict religious law. Jesus was having none of this exclusivity. Professor Matt Skinner, in the podcast Sermon Brainwave, states, Jesus was angered, and he was frustrated by the religious systems and the people of the time who refused to hear a new word from the Lord. He was upset and sick of seeing privileged people shut out those who most needed access to and were looking for a relationship with God. The poor, the meek, the merciful, the persecuted, all whom Jesus calls blessed. They are the sick and the lame, the lepers and demon-possessed, the tax collectors, sinners, who come to Jesus for healing of body and spirit. Jesus' teachings were not readily accepted by those in power. The so-called wise and political and religious leaders of the time were threatened by his message. So they engaged in a little bit of character assassination. Unfortunately, we're way too familiar with that these days. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton, a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. They repeatedly rejected Jesus, conspired against him, thus conspiring against the very purpose of God. Undaunted by their threats, Jesus issues the invitation, come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What kind of rest? What burdens? What does it mean to take up my yoke upon you? When we hear the word rest, many of us think about getting enough sleep. I recently watched a TED Talk titled The Real Reason We Are Tired by Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith. She made the point that sleep and rest are not the same things. Rest equals restoration. She goes on to define 7 types of rest, including spiritual rest. Spiritual rest is a connection, a deeper sense of longing and belonging. It's love, acceptance, and the purpose to engage something greater than yourself. The rest Jesus is offering us, according to the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Lindsay, is more than a nap or a good night's sleep. Although who doesn't like that, right? The rest Jesus offers is a transformed way of being in which our burdens are shared, alleviated, and sometimes eradicated. The rest lifts up the lowly and humbles the exalted, so that all are valued, known, and whole. This rest that Jesus offers does not destroy with violence, but triumphs through love, compassion, Now, accepting this invitation doesn't mean that Jesus removes all our burdens or they just disappear. To accept the invitation is a commitment to take up the yoke and to become yoked to Jesus. The term yoke has several meanings. In biblical times, oxen were used for farm work, and they were fitted together with a wooden frame that joined two animals together, known as yoke. The yoke served to harness the strength of the two animals, enabling them to work together to pull a heavy load or to pull the plow through the soil to prepare it for sowing. Another kind of yoke is a long pole with a bucket hanging from either end. It allows individuals to maximize their ability to carry a heavy load by distributing and balancing the load. Finally, some clergy wear stoles. The symbolism of wearing a stole is the clergy person has taken up the yoke of Christ. So taking up the yoke is having a relationship with Jesus, one where burdens are shared, and where we find strength through such sharing, and in turn, our loads are lightened. Professor Caroline Lewis says, "We are yoked to Jesus, whose yoke is kind and good. Jesus is pulling the burden with us, with his head through the other ox pull. And therefore, whatever burden you bear, you do not bear it alone." So are you experiencing some level of spiritual or emotional fatigue? Listen to this invitation again. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Give yourselves permission to lay down your burdens. Lay down your heavy load. Give yourself permission to enter into Sabbath living and honor the invite for real rest. Take a cue from the one who regularly departed from the demanding crowds in order to go away by himself to a quiet place to pray. I offer you these words of advice from Professor Catherine Scheffenbecker. To do so is not to shirk your duty. To take time to go to a quiet place and pray is to acknowledge that the burden is not really yours to carry alone in the first place. You will come back from that quiet place refreshed and ready to take up the burdens of the day again. But in that quiet place, you can shed the excess worry and care that are not yours to carry alone. You will discover the unforced rhythm of grace. So, how are you? Really, how are you? How is your heart and your spirit? The invitation is there for the taking. I hope you will RSVP. May it be so.